Hey you guys, I wanted to pretty much talk to you today about the plot hill. So you've been learning about the plot hill, how it's got your section for exposition and your section, I'll make a little dot here, a little section for rising action. That's when things start kind of heating up, new characters are introduced, there's maybe a problem, which we'll talk about in a second. There's the most exciting point, which is the climax, or the moment where your protagonist, who you met in the exposition, has some sort of interaction with usually an antagonist in the rising action, and it kind of comes to a big head, we would say, in the climax. After that, it pretty much happens, whether it's a person who meets their goal or is overcome by whatever it is that's against them, and we go into the next point, which is this falling action. Forgive me. All right, and then of course it ends with a resolution where things are tied up, maybe not so neatly, but it still ends. Maybe you have questions, but it ends. Now, what I really want to focus on is this idea that in the middle you've got conflict. And conflict, and that's not very clear, is it? Conflict, let's choose a new pen. Red, that would do nicely. Conflict is basically the problem, if you think about it. So it can happen early on where maybe your main character has some sort of struggle with an individual or themselves, but the conflict also takes place in the rising action. It, of course, takes place as it leads up to the climax. And then the climax, the conflict is really, really strong, and it's kind of the most significant moment of the conflict. And sometimes it even continues into the falling action. But conflict is this thing that it's not one spot, it's throughout the whole story. Now, there are a few types of conflict. There's man versus man, where that's a person versus another person. Could be a woman as well. We just use the term man. It's also man versus himself, which is a person versus their own fear or versus their own doubt, where they're really the struggle. Usually when a character is almost like scared to death, that's when it takes place. And then there's the last type of conflict where we have man versus nature, or man versus technology, or and usually nature is just has to do with man as a person is fighting against the elements. Maybe there's a hurricane, maybe there's a tidal wave, maybe there's a flood, maybe or it could be something like technology where they're fighting against robots, or they could be fighting against a computer. But the point of it is that these types of conflicts are seen throughout all of the short stories that you're going to be reading this year. So rather than think, oh, conflict goes right here, or conflict goes right here, or conflict goes right here. Conflict runs throughout the entire story. So, really important notes about conflict in 3 minutes and 43 seconds.